This episode is about this buck right here, my 2020 Kansas archery kill. It was booked for a few years before we were finally able to lock down a date, and so I was beyond excited to head out west for my first experience hunting out of state. Now, since I was so jacked up for this hunt, I really wanted to kind of do it for myself, not necessarily for the channel. So I did a little bit of filming, but far from the hardcore, multiple GoPros, DSLRs, etc. So this video is the best I could put together. This hunt was put together by my buddy Bob, who brought along his buddy Scott and Bob's nephew Alec. So the four of us hopped in a couple trucks and headed out west. The route took us through northern Ohio, so Cleveland, Toledo, over through Indianapolis and Indiana. Down to Kansas City, where we spent our first night. The next morning we got up and had less than a 5 or 6 hour drive to our spot. In all honesty, we didn't know exactly where we were headed. We were waiting to hear from the outfitter, and we got about halfway through the state of Kansas before he told us head to the Hoxie area. We got off in Hoxie, headed into the town, and waited to hear from the outfitter for our next step. And let's just say, even though it's only early November, Hoxie was ready for Santa.
Made it to Hoxie, Kansas finally, and they are set up for Christmas, ladies and gentlemen.
Only 80 degrees.
80 degrees? November 6th? Light up the Christmas tree.
Now the lodging situation was pretty cool. It was actually separate from the hunt. The outfitter had the leasing rights to the land we were hunting, but the lodge we were staying at was owned and operated completely independently from the outfitter. It was the perfect lodge to call home for the next 5 to 7 nights. Now, because of the time we got into town, the plan was to start hunting the next morning. That gave us the afternoon to get the trucks unloaded, get the meals situated, and get our bows tuned. The night before we got into camp, someone staying at the camp who we ended up not crossing paths with had some luck not far from where we were going to be hunting and where the lodge was. So just to add to the sleepless night of the excitement already, we knew there was some big bucks in the area. Now the first morning of the hunt was Saturday, November 7th. And we were told that it's actually better to get a little bit later start on that day because we didn't know where these stands were. So instead of walking in at 0:30, potentially busting something out of the area, since we had to find the stands and climb up them, etc., the outfitter strongly suggested we go in during daylight, pretty much drive right up to the stands, so that way we all knew where we were hunting. This view kind of gives you a better idea of the terrain we were hunting in. Again, pretty much all flat with some dips and valleys here and there, up until you get to the creek beds that some were dry, some were wet. Look how cute Alec is. Both trucks drove in. Bob and Scott went over to their section of the lease, and then Alec and I went over to our section after Bob and Scott got dropped off. Obviously, something no one can control is the weather. And let's just say it was far from perfect bow hunting weather. It was 65 to 75 degrees with 20 to 30 mile an hour winds up to 40 mile an hour gusts. This added a layer or a level of difficulty to our hunt, not only because of the wind, but the outfitter also had a wound and done rule. So if you shot a deer and you connected with it and you wound it and you don't harvest that deer, your hunt's over. He's considering your tag filled and you're done hunting. So with there being 30 to 40 mile an hour winds, even a 20-yard shot was far from a chip shot. Definitely weighed on my mentality and what I was comfortable with shooting, and was a factor throughout pretty much our entire hunt. Ironically enough, the outfitter suggested Alec go to one stand and I go to a different stand, but Alec is a much better shot than me, so him and I agreed that we were going to switch stands after day one. So each morning, Alec and I hopped in my truck, Scott and Bob hopped in Bob's truck. We went to the same parcel that the outfitter put us at and went to the same stands multiple days in a row. These leased properties that were a mix of ag and CRP fields were active farms, so every once in a while you got some company. One thing I didn't think about, silly me, was to see what other species were in season and what other tags I should pick up. And of course, as it always goes, had the opportunity at something that I didn't have a tag for. That would be the Merriman turkey. On the first full day of the hunt, Scott had some luck. That was actually after having some bad luck. The first day we hunted, Alec and I got out of the tree only to find Scott already at the truck. Due to the wind, Scott's bow actually ended up falling out of the tree. He wasn't comfortable sending an arrow at an animal without checking his zero, so he waited it out until we got back to the camp and he could check his zero. It ended up being the right move because the next day, the first full day of our hunt, Scott had some luck. In all honesty, I'm editing this video years after the hunt, so I don't remember how far of a shot it was. Scott was confident it was lethal, but it was an evening shot, and after a few hundred yards of tracking, Scott and the outfitter decided to back out and go back in the next morning with some daylight to find the buck. Now yes, because of the temperature, Scott did lose a little bit of meat, but not everything, which is great, and he harvested an amazing buck. Congratulations, Scott. The next 2.5 days were a grind. The wind kept up and so did the temperatures. Alec and I stuck it out, going to the same stand day in and day out. Sometimes break in the middle of the day, sometimes not. We started to kind of chuckle to ourselves after a little bit, saying, hey, did you see anything? Yeah, I saw a scrub 6-point, how about you? Oh, let me guess, you saw him about 2 o'clock? Yeah, why do you say that? Because I saw him at 4 o'clock. Then the next day, same thing, just backwards. Hey, Alec, did you see anything? Yeah, I saw a little scrub 4. Let me guess, around 2, because I saw him around 1. But that's hunting, right? It just goes that way sometimes. We ended up talking to the outfitter and asking if there was any other places we can go and hunt. He was pretty adamant that that was a good area. Not that we disagreed with him, we just view ourselves as relatively avid whitetail hunters, and we didn't see any does, we didn't see any fresh poop, we didn't see any rubs or scrapes or anything like that, so we were just wondering what other options were available. The outfitter asked us to hunt there one more morning, and if no one had any luck or didn't see anything promising, he would relocate us. That timing ended up being actually kind of perfect, because the night before we were going to be able to move, we pulled into our camp and had some action right out in the cornfield right in front of our camp. We got 1, 2, 3. Let's go a little bit more. I mean, they're not monsters. Now the bucks we saw breeding the doe were not exactly what we were in Kansas for in terms of class. Honestly, some of them pushed the borders of if we'd even shoot them in New York or not. But the temperature was dropping from like 70 something to mid 40s, and the wind was gonna die that night from 20, 30 down to almost nothing. Between the changes in the weather and the activity we saw in the field in front of us, we were absolutely amped up for the next day. The outfitter insisted we hunt at least one more morning before we move spots, and we said, yup, no problem. Hopefully something big walks out or someone has some luck to change our mentality. Protocol had been Alec and I parking at the road at that fence line, getting together our last couple things, and then walking out. For the previous 4 days, I was getting ready next to my driver's side rear tire, and as I'm going to get my bow, knowing this is the last morning I'll be hunting this area before we change spots, I just hear pshhh. There's air just absolutely spewing out of my back tire. Now, I had never changed a tire on this truck before. It was pretty new to me at the time, so I really wasn't comfortable doing that in the middle of nowhere on the side of some country road in the middle of Kansas. So I told Alec, go off, go to your stand or either stand, go do your thing. I'm gonna go back to camp, throw on the donut, and I'll get back out here. And that's what I did. Well, I'll give you guys a little update since I haven't really talked much of this hunt so far, but we're pretty much not having much luck. I'll keep saying much a lot. Alec and I keep saying the same 3 small bucks, little basket 8, little scraggly 6, and like a fork 4. So obviously not ideal. With it being the rut, we were hoping to be on some does. There's just no food in the area. The outfitter's pretty confident though that that's a good spot. The temperature has dropped, the winds changed and died down, so just my luck that on the best day of the hunt, I got a flat tire. Luckily, I noticed it just because I've been kind of getting dressed near my back driver's side tire, and ran back to camp, changed it there just in case something went wrong. I didn't want to be stranded out here because we're hunting in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't want to leave my truck or have to change a tire on the side of a dirt road in the middle of Kansas. But it's back on. I'm headed back out there. Later than I wanted, obviously. Obviously not ideal, but it's all uphill from here, as they say. So we'll see. Since I kind of had nothing to lose, I decided to strap the GoPro to my head and take a walk out really slowly, coming up over these peaks and valleys, doing some scanning before making my way to the next peak and valley, hoping to at least see something and maybe make a stalk on it. Bob had used this outfitter before for an archery hunt in Kansas around the same time of year and had some luck. He killed this beautiful heavy buck called moose. One thing Bob did mention was how the outfitter seemed more analytical than years before. He was all about how many days on stand it takes a hunter to see this certain class of deer and what the average shot distance usually is and what the kill ratio is per hunter and etc. So that weighed on my mind a little bit. I don't want to become a statistic here. Scott was obviously done and Bob had very similar action, very little. So we decided to all hop in Bob's truck, head a few towns away to where the outfitter's base camp was, and he was gonna put us on a farm that had a little bit more ag versus CRP. Since Scott was tagged out, I asked him, and he politely said yes, if he could take my truck into town with my tire, get a plug put in it so I could put the full tire back on for the drive home. During all this kind of last minute, let's switch trucks and get into Bob's and blah, 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 I had forgot my backpack in my truck. And I realized this about halfway to the new town that we were headed to. But I had my bow, my release, my camo, and my harness. And I figured, you know what? I will cross that bridge if I need to come to it. So while I'm getting familiar with the stand, I have no rangefinder, I have no binoculars, no tag, which is a little bit of a problem. But I figured, you know what? Forget all that for now. Let's just get this hunt going. Obviously, first trip was gonna be a pretty quick hunt since we only had the afternoon, but the outfitter took Alec and Bob to one spot, and I got with his coworker, and he took me to the spot that you're seeing on the screen right now. This new farm we were headed to was basically an alfalfa field. Maybe an 80 to 100 acre alfalfa field to my right, another 80 to 100 acre alfalfa field to my left, with a 200 or 300 acre alfalfa field that was all separated by this creek. The outfitter got me really jacked up about this spot. He said there was a buck in the area they called Butterball and showed me a few trail camera pictures. Believe me if you want to or not, this whitetail must have weighed 300 pounds. I mean, it was absolutely humongous. After sitting in the stand for a few hours and just scanning, I looked to my right, and smack dab running across the middle of the one alfalfa field was this massive bodied deer. I vividly remember thinking, that deer's legs look too small for its body. He's running smack dab across the middle of this alfalfa field into the creek bed that I'm hunting, probably 400 or 500 yards away, but enough to get me amped up. Not more than 30-40 minutes after seeing that, it all comes together.
I think you call this bucket fever. I'm looking at a fucking Kansas monster laying on the ground right now. Terrible shot. I had him, shot him in the neck, but he's down and he's not moving. I don't know if I should shoot him again or not. I think he's done. Oh, I wish I didn't shoot him like that. But he's down. He's not moving. He's not moving.
Maybe 30 to 40 minutes after watching that huge buck run east to west into the creek bed, I noticed another deer, big buck, running west to east in the other alfalfa field, also into the creek bed that I was hunting in. A few moments after that, I see him coming right down the creek bed, right at me. This deer gets 15 yards from me, and I'm drawing on him, and I release my arrow, and all I hear is tch-tch. I had hit a branch, which deflected the arrow entirely, and then the buck bounded off. The buck bounced to probably 25 yards away. His body's facing completely away from me, but his head is turned 180, looking right back at me. And I'm thinking three things at this time. I'm thinking, I cannot believe I spent this money and took this time and drove this far to come to Kansas to have an arrow dink off a branch, and that's how my hunt ends. Second thought was, oh my gosh, I'm a statistic now. I'm one of those bad statistics that this outfitter does not want on his resume. And thirdly, most importantly, was, holy crap, that buck is still standing there. Thankfully, I hunt with my quiver on because I don't think I would have killed this buck if I had to reach anywhere other than my bow to grab another arrow. So the buck's looking right up at me and then looking down and slowly scanning left and right. Somehow, while he's doing that, I'm able to pull another arrow out of my quiver, knock on, and get clipped on. And now I'm thinking, this buck needs to turn his head a little bit because I need to draw. given the direction his body is facing, if he turns his head and jumps to this one little clearing that I think he's going to jump into, I'm estimating it's a 32 yard shot. Again, I don't have my rangefinder. It's in my bag, which is in my truck, which is in a different town. And I'm thinking, I hope you jump there, and I'm hoping I'm right on the distance. The buck turns his head, looking right at that little clearing where I'm thinking he's going to jump. I draw. He makes the jump. I stop him and release the arrow. And I just see this buck hit the ground.
Okay, so about an hour ago, actually, hold on. I'll see when I was texting Travis, hold on. About 40 minutes ago, I see a freaking huge deer run across from east to west, across the smack dab middle of probably an 80-acre alfalfa field. He runs into the creek bed that I'm in, about 300 yards away, and I stand up and I knock on, I get ready to go. Or clip on, because I'm always knocked. I clip on and stood there for half an hour, didn't see him. I figured he wasn't coming this way because he would be walking with the wind. So I sit down, I start texting again. I was actually texting my boss to say, hey, can I take the rest of the week off and stay here? And they actually said, sure. I look up, he's running from west to east on the opposite side of the creek bed in the other alfalfa field back towards the creek bed. I'm thinking, no freaking way. I mean, unless it's a different deer, but I doubt it because this thing's huge.
So I actually do think it was a different deer. I think Butterball ran through the field to my east into the creek bed, went north and followed the creek bed that way, which ended up pushing this buck out of the west end of the creek bed across the field headed east back into the creek bed more towards the south end where I was located.
He's got to be the dominant buck in the area. I'm thinking, no freaking way. He comes back into the creek bed and I'm thinking, he's not going to work his way this way because the wind's coming at my face, which means he'd be walking towards me with the wind, and they don't do that. Next thing I know, I see a little bit of movement about 125 yards out. And he comes this way, and he's coming this way, and he's coming this way. He gets about 15 yards, maybe 18 yards in front of me. It starts to turn broadside. He stands there. I let one rip. Hit a branch, missed him completely. I shouldn't have taken that first shot, now that I'm looking at it. He's looking right up at me, and I somehow am able to knock another arrow, draw back on him. He takes one little jump over this down log. I let one rip, and I don't know, I think I pulled it. I think I had buck fever, I don't know what happened. But it's not a good shot. I shot him in the neck, he went right down. He's not moving. It's been about 20 minutes. I'm still shaking. It's been about 20 minutes. Got a buck down in Kansas. I'm looking at him. Terrible shot, actually. Shot him in the neck, but I dropped him. I don't think I have to put another one in him. He's not moving. I can't even get down and move him. Law in Kansas is you're not allowed to move it until the buck is tagged, and I'm an idiot. Left my backpack in my truck, and the truck's halfway back to the other camp. So the guy that has my truck is turning around, going back to the outfitter. The outfitter and him are coming here, and then I can update you guys. Buck down, baby!
The outfitter came back, had my bag, my tag, my knife, everything else I needed. We were able to get the pictures, and the rest is history, as they say. Absolutely awesome buck. Outfitter knew of him and just called him the Big 8. Didn't really have a cool name for him because Butterball kind of dominated that area. As you can see, I was extremely pleased with the size of the rack, and the body obviously took up the entire truck bed of the outfitter's truck. Got him back to camp in the evening and hung him up overnight.
It's all electronic harvest reporting, and Kansas makes you take a few specific pictures and then get it on the books.
Technically, that was either the last or second to last day of our hunt, but since we only had so much luck and action, the outfitter gave Bob and Alec an extra 2 days of hunting, which was awesome. One thing I found that was really cool in Kansas, which I haven't experienced before, was walk-in hunting access. We called it WIHA, W-I-H-A. What that is, in my understanding, is let's say a farmer has 1,000 acres, but 800 of it is agricultural and 200 is just woods. He can open that 200-acre parcel of woods to just the general public. So as long as you're a licensed hunter with a Kansas tag, you can walk onto private land and hunt there. The outfitter also had a no doe policy, but you get a doe tag with your Kansas tag anyways. So Scott and I figured, might as well go try and kill one. After Scott and I figured that out, we realized we were surrounded by WIHA land. So we geared up the next late morning, and headed off to some nearby public access land. That first bonus morning, Scott and I just did a lot of driving around and road scouting to get the lay of the land, see where various WIHA points were, and see what kind of action we could come across. And after spotting some from the road, we decided we were going to stick to this little parcel. He start on one end, I start on the other, and slowly work our way towards the middle. See if we can kind of kick something to each other. Did not have to get too deep into the woods before I started to see some awesome signs that there were bucks in the area. And then lo and behold, another awesome encounter.
impressive. He's got a doe tag burning a hole in our pocket and an extra day to hunt. So we just did a little drive, posted him up on the end of a swamp. I walked the edge of a lake, kicked up a couple bucks. Both, well, one was healthy to shoot, the other maybe not. Not that we could have shot anyways. So now it's my turn to sit. Scott's walking in now. I got a 30-yard shot to my right, 20-yard shot to my left. Let's try and get it done, baby.
Alec nor Bob had any luck on those additional days. In hindsight, Alec probably should have bought one of those dual species tag. I guess you can get a mule deer or whitetail tag, one or the other, because he had mule deer all around him in that second spot we were at. Bob did have one of those either species tags and had some bad luck on a mule deer, so that tag went unfilled. But all in all, a 50% kill ratio out of 4 hunters is a pretty gosh darn good hunt. Loaded the trucks back up, a little bit heavier than we went out there with. Got back home, had a lot of meat to cut up. Had to borrow a grinder from a buddy, and then called my dad in for an extra set of hands, and we got to cutting and bagging. Absolutely awesome experience. I cannot wait to go back to Kansas. So pleased for this guy right here. Wish it was a little bit more of an ethical shot, but I'm glad he didn't suffer. It was a quick kill, and I will forever remember every detail about that day. Thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, there's way better ones on the way, I promise. Stay tuned.